Alright, before we get into this one, if you're new here, welcome. And if you're back again, you already know these stories don't end the way people expect them to. My name is Cassandra Whitfield, and for 4 years I built an architecture firm from a single rented desk into a company with 40 employees and a building of our own in downtown Denver, Colorado, and I want to walk you through exactly how the two people closest to me tried to take every bit of it away in a single afternoon, because I think about that day more than almost anything else in my life. I met Derek Manning at a networking event during my second year running the firm, back when I was still doing my own bookkeeping at midnight because I couldn't afford to hire anyone yet. He was a commercial real estate consultant, charming in that easy, practiced way that made everyone assume he'd been born successful rather than having clawed his way there like I had. His mother, Regina, ran a boutique interior design consultancy that mostly survived on her late husband's old client list. And from the very first dinner I had with the two of them, I understood something I chose to ignore for far too long. Regina didn't see me as her son's partner. She saw me as an asset her family hadn't earned yet. For the first 2 years, things were fine. Or fine enough that I convinced myself the small comments didn't matter. Derek would mention, almost casually, how much easier my life would be if I let someone else handle the stressful parts of running a business. Regina would ask, at every single family dinner, whether I'd considered bringing on a steadier hand to help manage the firm's finances, always phrased like genuine concern, never once landing anywhere close to genuine. I didn't listen closely enough because I was busy. My firm had just landed a mixed-use development contract worth more than anything we'd touched before, and I was working 80-hour weeks trying to make sure we delivered on it without falling apart. Derek proposed that same year in front of both our families, and I said yes without hesitating, because at the time, I genuinely believed he was proud of what I'd built rather than eyeing it like something he was owed. The real shift started about 8 months before that afternoon in my office. Derek began showing up unannounced during client meetings, introducing himself as someone who helped with strategic direction for the firm, a title nobody had given him and nobody had asked for. He started reviewing my emails on the shared family tablet we used for scheduling, which I now understand was never innocent. Regina began attending my board meetings as a guest, sitting quietly in the back, taking notes on things that had absolutely nothing to do with her. When I raised it with Derek, gently at first, he told me I was being paranoid, that his mother just wanted to understand my world better since we were getting married. I wanted to believe him. I think some part of me needed to believe him, because admitting otherwise meant admitting I'd built my entire future around someone who saw my company as a future inheritance rather than my life's work. 3 months before the confrontation, I noticed something that finally made the paranoia feel a lot less paranoid. Our lead structural engineer mentioned, in passing, that Derek had asked him detailed questions about the firm's ownership structure, specifically who held controlling shares and what would happen to those shares if something happened to me. Not if I stepped down, not if I sold the company. If something happened to me, I sat with that phrase for an entire week before I did anything about it, because some part of me still wanted an innocent explanation to exist. It didn't. I quietly pulled records from our building management company and discovered that Derek had, 4 separate times over 2 months, requested access to areas of our office building he had absolutely no professional reason to be in, including the small server room where our financial and legal documentation was stored. That was the moment I stopped explaining things away. I want to be completely honest with you about what I did next, because I think it matters more than anything else in this story. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream or cry or demand answers. I went quiet in exactly the way you go quiet when you finally understand that panic will only tip your hand. I called my attorney, a woman named Priscilla Okafor, who had handled my firm's incorporation from day one, and I asked her a very specific question. I asked her to confirm, in writing, exactly who legally owned the building my firm operated out of. Here's the part Derek and Regina never bothered to learn, because they never once asked me directly, they only asked around me. 18 months earlier, when the firm's growth made buying our own building financially sensible, I hadn't purchased it under my personal name or the firm's name. I had purchased it through a holding company I'd set up specifically for asset protection, a completely standard, completely legal structure that half the small business owners I knew used for exactly this reason. The holding company's name gave away nothing about who controlled it. Derek had spent months investigating the firm's ownership and had somehow never once thought, to ask who actually owned the walls around it. The afternoon it all came apart started, like any other Tuesday. Derek walked into my office unannounced, Regina trailing behind him carrying a leather folder like she was attending a formal signing rather than ambushing her son's fiancé at work. He set a stack of papers on my desk, a transfer agreement that would have restructured my firm's board to include both of them in permanent advisory positions with veto power over major decisions, positions that came with compensation packages larger than my own salary at the time. "Sign the transfer papers," he said, sliding a pen toward me, "or we tell the board you've been having breakdowns." Regina's noticed it too. Erratic behavior. Missed meetings. It wouldn't be hard to make a case that you're not fit to run this alone anymore. Regina was already smiling behind him. The exact same smile she wore at every family dinner where she'd asked about my steadier hand comment. Like she'd been rehearsing this moment for months, because I later learned she had been. I want you to understand something about that moment, because I think it's the most important part of this entire story. I wasn't scared. I was almost relieved in the strange way you feel relief when a suspicion you've been carrying quietly for months finally gets confirmed out loud by the person you suspected. I looked at the papers on my desk. I looked at Derek's face, calm and certain like he already had this one. And I asked him one simple question. I asked him who he thought owned the building we were currently standing in. He said my name, obviously, with the exact confidence of a man who had never once bothered to check. I told him he was wrong, and I watched his expression shift for the very first time in that entire conversation. I explained calmly that the building belonged to a holding company he'd never heard of, one that I controlled entirely, and that under our commercial lease agreement, which he also apparently never read, any attempt at a hostile board restructuring by non-shareholding parties constituted a material breach that voided their guest access to the premises immediately. Regina's leather folder stayed frozen halfway to the desk. What Derek genuinely did not know, because he'd spent so much energy investigating rumors instead of asking me directly, was that I'd already spoken with Priscilla 2 weeks earlier about exactly this scenario, after our engineer mentioned that unsettling comment about if something happened to me. I had already updated the firm's governance documents to explicitly bar any advisory or board position for immediate family members of majority shareholders without a unanimous existing board vote, a policy I'd framed publicly as standard corporate governance, not as a direct response to 2 specific people standing in my office at that exact moment. I told Derek and Regina as calmly as I could manage that building security had already been notified, their access badges were being deactivated effective that afternoon, and that any further communication regarding the firm's ownership should go through Priscilla's office rather than mine. Derek's face went through something I can only describe as watching a man realize, in real time, that he'd spent 8 months building a plan on top of an assumption he never once verified. Regina tried one more angle before they left, her voice suddenly softer, suddenly warmer, the way people get when threats stop working and they pivot straight to guilt. She said something about family, about how this wasn't how you treat people who are about to become your family. I told her, honestly, that I'd learned exactly what kind of family I was about to marry into roughly 3 months earlier, and that I was genuinely grateful I'd found out before the wedding instead of after. Derek didn't say anything else. He just picked up the transfer papers off my desk, and I noticed his hand wasn't quite steady anymore, and the 2 of them left without another word. Security escorted them out within the hour, and I canceled the engagement that same evening over the phone because I genuinely did not need to see his face again to know I'd made the right decision. The aftermath was quieter than I expected, honestly. Derek tried, briefly, to spread word among mutual industry contacts that I'd had some kind of mental health episode, exactly the story he'd threatened to tell the board, but it didn't land anywhere. Mostly because I'd spent 4 years building a reputation with actual clients and actual delivered projects. And reputations built on real work tend to survive attempted sabotage built on nothing at all. Regina's design consultancy lost 2 major referral clients that year after word got around about how the confrontation had gone. Not because I said anything publicly, but because Priscilla's office had to send a formal cease and desist regarding the false statements Derek made, and formal legal letters have a way of traveling through small professional circles, whether you want them to or not. My firm landed the mixed-use development contract we'd been working toward, and 2 years later we broke ground on our 2nd building, one I bought outright under my own name this time, because I no longer needed to hide behind a holding company from people who'd never bothered to ask me a direct question in the first place. I think about that afternoon sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a strange kind of gratitude. Because the version of my life where I signed those papers exists somewhere, and I am endlessly relieved I never have to live in it. If you'd been sitting in my office that day, watching someone slide a thread across your own desk, would you have handled it the way I did, or would you have signed just to keep the peace? Tell me honestly down in the comments, because I genuinely want to know. And if this story kept you hooked all the way to the end, go ahead and subscribe, because there's another one just like it coming very soon, about the people who assume you'll fold before they've bothered to check what you actually own.